when you really look at the pro wrestling games from back then, it kind of emulates what you saw on the television at that time. So yeah, so definitely pro wrestling games, they have come a long time, and one of the first games that we are going to look at is Tag Team Pro Wrestling. Tag Team Pro Wrestling is from 1989. It was originally, 1983. It was originally titled Big Pro Wrestling in Japan. It's a wrestling video game developed by Technicals in Japan. It was first released for arcades in 83, published by Data East. However, the game was available in both Japan and North America, although the North American version only credited Data East for the work. In the mid-1980s, this game was ported to computers and the Famicom and the Nintendo Entertainment System. Yep, the Famicom was Japan's version of the NES. So yeah, when you look at that game, you just look at all of how it looked like. Look at the people at the side. You know, those are all the people. And if you ask me, they're all one big family because they all look the same. You know, this looks like a tag team match that's happening. You got two people in the ring wrestling, and you can't really tell who is who, right? But you don't see any referee. And obviously, we've come a long way to be able to see the referee in these games. Moving up only just a couple years, we have WWF WrestleMania. It's obviously named after the annual popular pay-per-view, or what we call these days PLE, Premium Live Event. It's a video game for the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System. It was developed by Rare and published by Acclaim in 1989. This was the first ever WWF licensed game on the NES and the second WWF game overall featuring following Micro League Wrestling. Micro League Wrestling was a game that was made. It was based on the WWE, but it was never licensed by the WWE. The release of WrestleMania marked the start of a decade-long partnership between Acclaim and the WWF. The game was released shortly before WrestleMania 5 and was intended to, WrestleMania 5, and was intended to promote the event. The title screen features a tagline from WrestleMania 3, bigger, badder, and better. When you're looking at that game, at least you know who is who. You know who is who standing inside of the ring. Obviously, you can tell Andre the Giant is the one on the side, and then you see Hulk Hogan on the left. But if you look underneath the name, you see the name says Alex. When you played that game, you actually got to type in your own name, right? So obviously, that probably was one of the things where they made you feel like you were a part of the game. But definitely looking at that game itself, you can see like how we've come such a long way, how it kind of even replicates what you would see in pro wrestling around that time. Like around that time, you would not be able to see the audience. It would be dimly lit. It'd be darkly lit, you know, so that you could focus more on what's going on in the side of the ring. But you had no referee still, and you didn't have any really audience. But the graphics have come a long way since that first wrestling game, Tag Team Wrestling. The next game I want to look at is another game that I personally owned. I remember going to Funko Land on Fordham Road in the Bronx, and my mother actually buying me this game. I thought it was so cool. I thought it was the coolest kid on the block. And this game is WWF Raw. It's a professional wrestling game, obviously, that was based on the WWF's television show of the same name, Raw. It was released by Acclaim Entertainment for the Super Nintendo, the 32X, the Mega Drive, Genesis, and Game Boy in late 1994 and early 1995. It's the sequel to the WWF game Royal Rumble and the final installment of LJN's 16-bit WWF trilogy. LJN also made not only... They also helped make figures, action figures, toys, I guess, for a lack of a better term, for the WWF as well, too. This game features multiple modes, including, obviously, one-on-one. It's not a wrestling game without one-on-one. Tag team, Bedlam. I can't remember what Bedlam was. It might have been something like a Rumble or multi-man match or something like that. They had Survivor Series. They had the Royal Rumble, and they had the Raw Endurance match. I can promise you all up till today, because I played on the emulator. I have an emulator on my iPhone where I get to play retro games, and I still can't beat the Raw Endurance match. That was one of the first games as well, too, that supports multi-tap. so that you can play with additional people. Not just 2, but you can play with 4 people at the time. But looking at that graphics there, it's only 94. And look, we already got the referee in the ring, right? You can see that you have Jim Ross. You have Vince McMahon on the right sitting over there at the announce table. And then you also have Jerry the King Lawler. So that game there definitely replicates what you were seeing at the time when it comes to the video games. And these were games from the early 80s to like the mid 90s. And I remember trying to invite my friends over to come play these games. And my mother would say, no, you can't have anybody in the house. My mother was never a fan of having people over in the house.